As things heat up inside America, important international relations are cooling down to sub-zero temperatures, as we've just been discussing, with the accusations and insults flying between Russia and the West. The UN Secretary General says the Cold War is back, only with a crucial difference: communications, that vital safety valve, are worse now than they were back then. The Trump administration is deciding whether or not to impose more sanctions on Russia. But what will their next move be? And just how much worse can these relations get? Joining me from Vienna is Andrey Kortunov. He is the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Mr. Kortunov, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I'm sure you heard Secretary Panetta. I mean, he really said that we have to, the United States, the West, has to work with Russia and all the other countries in the field when it comes to Syria. Given all that's happened, can you see any way towards that happening anytime soon?
Well, I think that de facto on the ground, there is a degree of cooperation. If you take the southwest Syria, the so-called Amman agreement is still in operation. And I think that the contacts between the Russian military and the US military on the ground are fairly strong. However, definitely that's not enough to end the conflict in Syria. We need to work much more in the framework of the Geneva process. And unfortunately, the United States right now is not an active participant to this process.
Mr. Kortunov, you say the Geneva process, but as you know, Russia and Iran and Turkey, they're all headed off on a bit of a different line, and President Assad has never really cooperated with the Geneva process. Do you actually think, at this point, with tensions so high, that there's any chance for a political solution to this?
Well, first of all, on cooperation between Russia, Iran, and Turkey, there is the so-called Astana process, but it's not a competition with the Geneva process, since in Astana we are talking primarily about de-escalation and ceasefire. Geneva should resolve the political issues of Syria and should help to turn Syria back into a normal country. But let me tell you, you are talking about whether it is possible. Many people would say that we need another major crisis so that the two leaders would look into the abyss and get really scared and start working together, like it was the case during the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. Maybe the time has come to really look into that and to make sure that our tactical interests are not that important so that they would prevent us from working with each other. I don't expect miracles. I don't think that something will change dramatically, but I still believe that we need to have a summit meeting between the two presidents. We need to discuss the fundamentals, and the more specific the US position is, the easier it will be to somehow find a modus of operandi with Russia.
Mm-hmm. I just want to play you a soundbite from Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He spoke about what happened over the weekend and about the words he might use against the allied leaders. Just listen to this.
I cannot be impolite to the heads of other states. And of course, I cannot be impolite to the head of my state. But you quoted the leaders of France and UK and the United States. And frankly speaking, all the evidence which they quoted was based on the media reports and on social networks.
So, Mr. Kortunov, he went on to say the event did not take place. What did take place was a staged thing. And he's talking about the chemical weapons attack on Duma a couple of weeks ago. How does one go? Do you believe it was a hoax?
Well, I think that the international investigation is still on, and inspectors from the Organization on the Elimination of Chemical Weapons should make their conclusion. We know that sometimes mistakes happen. We know how the United States got into Iraq. So I would suggest that we would give the experts representing the international community to get to the ground, to explore, and to make their findings public.
Well, I mean, they've been trying to go, and there's been a lot of back and forth about why they can't get in. They're saying that the Russians and the Syrians haven't yet given them access to Duma, so we will see whether that's the case. The UN says they've given all the clearances. But, you know, again, Foreign Minister Lavrov over the days has said that the situation between Russia and the United States is, you know, is below the level they were during the Cold War. And as you heard, the Secretary General of the UN said the same thing. How do you assess it? Is it that bad? I mean, you talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we talked about this vital communications link, which doesn't seem in a real way to be present.
It's exactly the point. I think that if we compare the situation today with the Cold War, it's not the Cold War of 1970s or 1980s. It's the Cold War of early 1950s, when they had no red lines, where they didn't know what to expect from each other, when the risks were very high. And this is very unfortunate. I think that can and should be changed. It will not require a capitulation of either side. I think that it doesn't mean that the United States should make a favor to Russia or the other way around. It's just a matter of political will. Unfortunately, I think many politicians in both countries do not realize the gravity of the situation. Arguably, what we went through during the weekend was by far the most dangerous situation since the end of the Cold War.
Let me just carry on with that line, because Prime Minister May to Parliament said today one of the reasons they did it is because there was no other avenue. They have been blocked over and over again from doing the kinds of things that you are recommending by the Russians in the Security Council. So just listen to this for a moment.
On each occasion when we have seen every sign of chemical weapons being used, Russia has blocked any attempt to hold the perpetrators to account at the UN Security Council, with 6 such vetoes since the start of 2017. And just last week, Russia blocked a UN resolution that would have established an independent investigation able to determine responsibility for this latest attack. So regrettably, we had no choice but to conclude that diplomatic action on its own is not going to work.
So it just seems to be that, you know, on both sides, it just keeps sinking into a deeper and deeper freeze. You know, you talked about another great crisis. I mean, this is one of them. But do you think Syria is now going to be a free-for-all? Or do you think Russia and its ally, you know, Iran and Assad, have kind of won already? How do you assess the situation on the ground in Syria?
Well, I don't think that you can win in Syria, because the conflict keeps being fueled from the outside. They pour this fuel into the fire. So the conflict cannot simply exhaust itself. It's not just about Iran or Russia, but we have Turkey, we have the Gulf, we have the United States, we have Israel. So I think that the major players have to get together and to decide whether they can afford to continue this conflict. And if not, then I think we have the Geneva document. We know that we need a constitutional reform in Syria. We know that we have elections that should be monitored by the United Nations. We want to have a secular Syria and a democratic country.
All really interesting. Thank you so much for your perspective, Andrey Kortunov.